The longest run of the British monarchy has just been submitted to speedrun.com. It will be a long while before the moderators of the website verify this record, as their video player only runs at 2x speed max. But, you see, there's something you need to know about the runner. There's a secret there, and it's all in the name. It has been, the whole time, in front of everyone's faces. Elizabeth II. We have to ask ourselves, who was Elizabeth I?
God save the Queen, her fascist regime that made you a moron, potential H-bomb. So God save the Queen, she's no human being, and there's no future in England's dreaming. God save, no future, no future, no future for you.
Elizabeth I began her run in 1558 and ended it in 1603, for a total of 45 years. Now, that run is nothing special, but the events surrounding her run definitely are. It's important to understand that with Elizabeth I's reign came a lack of interest in speedrunning that had not been seen in decades. And with that lack of interest came detest. Online trolls like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe and Minecraft griefer Francis Drake came to prominence during this time period. See, before Elizabeth I had begun her run, there was an incredibly exciting time period lasting 11 years in which some of the absolute craziest runs in speedrunning happened. And this period of speedrunning began with her father, the original Mad Lad, King Henry VIII. Henry realized very early on into his run that he was just not going to beat the record. He was just too fit to die early enough into his life to beat the record. Plus, there was no one badass enough to overthrow him either. He refused to use the abdication strat, as this was considered a separate category altogether at the time, due to its controversial nature that many felt was unfair. He didn't want anything to do with that, and so he began to consider options to achieve the record vicariously, through his heir. He and his cougar wife, Catherine of Aragon, had already conceived an heir, Mary I. Unfortunately, though, at the time, people were pretty biased against girl gamers and considered all runs performed by them to also be in their own separate category. Tudor-era gaming historians often refer to this as pretty cringe. Henry was no different in his beliefs and wanted to have a son who would beat the record. And so he did some things that the Catholic Church was not really fond of. Catherine of Aragon had unfortunately depleted her offspring meter, and due to the mechanics of the game, was now no longer able to forge a male heir. So, Henry pulled a move considered controversial, the divorce strat. When all was said and done, Henry was remarried. Unfortunately, though, he soon found his second wife pretty cringe too, and so he implemented the wife kill strat and murdered her. Eventually, his third wife Jane gave birth to a son, Edward VI, and then she just kinda died. This was it though. This was his chance to finally enact his plan that he had been plotting for nearly 2 decades. He just had to time everything right, and then his son, Edward VI, with his mother's poor immune system, perfect for speedrunning, would take the record. How was this supposed to work though? Well, he got really fat, which negatively affected his health. In addition to this, he suffered a leg wound from a jousting accident, which affected his mobility among other things, and figured out how to implement the scurvy tactic via abstaining from eating fruit. And so, when Henry finally thought that it was just the right time, he passed on the baton to Edward VI, and while his plan was solid, and his timing was very good, it wasn't perfect. Edward VI did not get the world record. But here's where things get really interesting. He not only came very close, but he also helped to set into motion the events that would lead to the world record. You see, Edward VI was able to pull off an extremely impressive 6.5 years, having predictably come down with a terminal illness at the age of 15. And the story might have ended here, if not for Henry having had a contingency plan that he had left with his advisors. In the event that Edward did not end his run in time, he would have these advisors compel Edward to pick someone controversial to take the baton, so to speak. Through the line of succession, the next runner should have been his aunt, Mary I, better known by her gamertag, Bloody Mary. But you see, Edward chose his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, which upset Mary to no end. What happened next is still hotly debated amongst early modern speedrunning historians. What is known, though, boils down to this. Bloody Mary was supposed to run next. Everyone knew this. Think of your older brother, Billy, who grabbed the controller when it was actually your turn to play Rugrats: The Search for Reptar on PS1. And so you went to your mom because Billy was being unfair. And so she came in and grounded Billy because that was not very cash money of him. And so then you got to play Rugrats: The Search for Reptar on PS1. Yeah, it was kind of like that. At this point, Mary just wanted the opportunity to run the game. It was her birthright that she should play Rugrats: The Search for Reptar on PS1. So Mary went to her mom, which in this case was the Pope, and so the Catholic Church got together and took back the PS1 controller, which in this case meant that they ousted Lady Jane and coronated Bloody Mary, and then they finally grounded Billy, which in this case meant they executed Lady Jane. And all of this, inevitably, led to the fastest ever speedrun of the English monarchy in history, an awe-inspiring 9-day run by Lady Jane. This record really is remarkable, but the runner, quite honestly, not so much. You can look at this record in two ways. One, that it was a record crafted by other more knowledgeable and impressive runners who used Lady Jane as a puppet runner for this achievement, a run that was the culmination of years of planning and the madness and perhaps divine inspiration of a gluttonous, often cringy, but ultimately dripped out and Kanye-level genius runner. Or two, Lady Jane just got really lucky. Whether or not it makes sense, the public today is widely unaware of this record at all, and most experts often recite the tale that it was all luck. Two years after all of this, Bloody Mary was dead, her run ending even faster than Edward VI. Cue 45 years of Elizabeth I, Mary's sister, and in turn, 45 years of disinterest and a lack of enthusiasm for speedrunning in general. Roughly 400 years pass, and a new Elizabeth begins her run. This is the narrative that people are missing today about Elizabeth II's run. She never wanted the record for herself. She wanted it for her son, Charles III. What's different, though, is that Charles III never had the dumpster fire of genes that Edward VI had, and so Elizabeth II had to adapt for her plan. Instead of ending her run early, she would have to extend it longer than anyone had ever played before, and that's just what she did, eventually ending her run at an unheard of 70 years. Could the biggest failure lead to the biggest win in speedrunning ever? Did Elizabeth II, like Henry VIII before her, take the fall? Whatever the case, looming over this scheme spanning decades is something that has been a long time coming. Viewership of this run is at an all-time low, because really, who the fuck cares about some really ugly white people that owe their entire world to the generations of slaves their forefathers stole from them? Some kid named Charles is in charge now, and that's fine, because no one's really watching anyways. So, what do you think? Who's really the winner? The runners who intentionally sabotage their own runs to set up new records? the actual record holders themselves, who had nothing really to do with their own record. Or all of us, who don't have to give a shit about these nerds anymore. One thing's for sure, the losers are the mods of speedrun.com who have to verify this record. Thanks for watching.